Our next presenter is Olivia Jerzik, the Clinical Services Manager at Hader Clinic Queensland, a specialist long-term treatment provider supporting individuals experience addiction and co-occurring mental health conditions. With more than a decade of experience in program development, clinical governance and evidence-informed practice, Olivia is passionate about integrating both clinical expertise and lived experience into recovery-focused care. Today, Olivia will be presenting on the topic of doing what works, integrating lived experience and clinical evidence in holistic addiction treatment. Please welcome Olivia.
Thank you. All right. As I start this presentation, I'd first like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners, the Yugambeh people of the lands and waters we gather upon today, and I acknowledge all of their descendants. I also acknowledge all of the many Aboriginal people from other regions, as well as Torres Strait and South Sea Islander people who now live in the local area and made an important contribution to our community. So I would like to acknowledge that if themes emerge that invoke something personal to you, or you need to take a moment to regulate, please feel welcome to do so. Whether that means just closing your eyes, engaging in some deep breathing, taking a stretch, or leaving the room at any time, please do so. I would like to begin by reading a passage. The years were both wonderful and difficult. After the separation of their parents and a father who hadn't been present for many years, the bond between this brother and sister was unbreakable, unconditional. She looked at her older brother as somewhat of a father figure and absolutely idolised him in her adolescence and teens. As the years went on, his ever-growing challenge of depression, failed relationships, and alcohol use got worse. And so she stepped up to be the big sister, to support him when the times got tough. It was never a burden, and there was never a shred of doubt. At 24 years old, there she was, raising a young child and getting through postgraduate studies when she received a phone call. A package had arrived in the mail from overseas. It was from her brother. He'd been a missing person for over a week. Finally, a clue, perhaps some answers. She hurriedly asked for the contents of the package to be unwrapped, with each second of silence feeling like an eternity, until the words were read out over the phone. In those moments, she broke. He wanted to disappear, not just metaphorically, emotionally and physically, life was all too much. In the weeks that followed, she did everything within her power to find him, despite the thousands of kilometres between them. This could not be the end of his story. Sometime after, another phone call came through. He was in hospital following a suicide attempt. She immediately researched rehab options and the best psychologists in his area, determined that she would get him out of that hospital and into treatment, and was on the next flight overseas. With the best intentions, what transpired was very different. She arrived days after his attempt to end his life. The evidence was still there, untouched, beneath his house, with a note he'd written for his daughter neatly placed inside an envelope. The weight of it was confronting and unforgettable. Full of pain, yet so full of love. Full of shame and void of any self-worth and acknowledgement of the beauty and adoration that everyone else felt for him. She began to clean and tidy the remnants of his attempt, somehow thinking that by removing the best, it may unburden the weight that he was carrying. When he returned home from the hospital, they talked for hours and hours, day after day. One afternoon, in the hot tropical sun, there he sat, alive, but just surviving. The reality of actually going into treatment seemed like an impossible feat, and one that she couldn't convince him of. Instead, he sat there, beer after beer, can after can, and although she didn't drink much, she sat there drinking too. Her thought process: the more I consume, the less he will have. That's right. She would go to any length to support him, even when she didn't know how. She was always there to love him, even when he couldn't love himself. This is just one chapter of the many stories that those of us in AOD carry, and one of the many reasons that form our why. This story is mine. I share this today to make a point that central to effective AOD treatment, evidence alone does not move people, and compassion alone does not sustain change. It's the integration of both clinical rigour and lived understanding that creates safety, trust, and momentum in recovery. Often when I'm asked about my why, I will say something like, I'm so passionate about this sector. I always knew I wanted to work in AOD. And whilst this is true, what goes beneath this is much deeper. I must admit, despite working in AOD for over a decade, this is the first time that I've shared my lived experience. Not out of shame or fear, but simply because I felt that it didn't fit within the scope of my clinical role. It does, however, shape the person that I am. It drives my why, and I believe it is what forms great leaders in our sector. Not the absence of lived experience, but the ability to integrate it ethically, safely, and alongside evidence-informed practice. As many in this room would attest, lived experience fuels our work. For me, I've had many experiences that contribute to my why, that ignited my passion for working in AOD and the mental health space, and there was never a doubt that this is where I was meant to be. Each day working in this sector is an absolute privilege, and I hope that in the days, months, years, and decades to come, that everyone listening today stops to reflect on their why and never loses sight of this. If we want to move from hope to action, we must create systems that honour both the data and the stories, because recovery does not happen in either space alone. Recovery, as we know, is complex and multifaceted. And after nearly a decade of operation, Hader Clinic Queensland has continued to evolve its model of care to reflect this complexity, with a strong focus on delivering a whole person, whole system approach to treatment. Our model aligns with our mission to provide long-term treatment options spanning detoxification through to structured aftercare. This continuum of care is delivered by a multidisciplinary team, including medical practitioners, allied health professionals, lived experience staff, and external specialist facilitators. Phase 1 is delivered within Hader Clinic Queensland's private hospital setting. So this program is subsidised for individuals with private health insurance and provided at no cost to eligible veterans holding a white or gold card. This phase is a 28-night program and extends beyond medically supervised detox. Residents also participate in the introductory AOD education program, which is a key point of difference for Hader Clinic Queensland. Our education program introduces residents to the neurobiology of addiction and recovery, different modality treatments like ACT and CBT, exploring relationships, values, emotional intelligence, boundaries, the 12-step fellowship, sleep hygiene, an introduction into mental health, and understanding the process of detox on the body. Program participation is encouraged within days of admission, and it defends the resident against isolation and rumination. Residents connect with one another and engage in a therapeutic community-style arrangement, offering mutual support and shared understanding, all critical foundations for recovery. Following completion of detox and the 4-week introductory AOD education program, residents then progress into phase 2, an 8-week residential rehab program. This phase is evidence-based and holistic, incorporating intensive psychoeducation workshops, including addictive behaviours, mental health mastery, relapse prevention, trauma, and strength and resilience. Residents participate in a structured program that includes group therapy, individual counselling, physical exercise, art therapy, nutrition groups, planned recreation, and take responsibility for themselves and the spaces in which they reside. The program then really promotes accountability and responsibility through psychological and behavioural change. The program is led and facilitated by allied health professionals alongside our lived experience support staff. And during the residence program, family and significant others are also engaged to participate in a program offering monthly individual family support sessions as well as twice monthly family group education sessions. And these group education sessions remain available for family members to continue to access following their loved one's completion of program at no cost. Similarly, former residents can also access a weekly online meeting with current residents of the program, which helps to support that ongoing connection, peer support, and continuity of care. Continuity of care becomes particularly critical following residential treatment. Evidence consistently shows that relapse risk is highest in the weeks immediately following discharge from an inpatient program, highlighting the need for structured and accessible support during this period. Residents who complete a continuous 12-week program are eligible for admission into the transitional housing program for as little as 4 weeks, up to 36 weeks, with a typical stay ranging anywhere between 12 and 24 weeks. This program is located in the southwest of Brisbane and includes a structured Monday to Friday program with things like daily check-in, group therapy sessions, individual counselling, 12-step facilitation, medication management, curfews, as well as regular alcohol and drug testing. Residents can also access our outpatient program either following transitional housing or as an alternative for those who already have access to stable accommodation. And this program operates 3 days per week and includes those same sort of core therapeutic groups. Residents who do complete an 8-week residential program and are returning to regions outside of Brisbane, access is then provided to them to our Hader app, which is available obviously as a mobile platform. And this support is offered initially for a 4-week period with the option for extended engagement, whether it's clinically indicated or whether client directed. And I will sort of discuss the app's functionality and the role in continuity of care in more detail next. So historically, Hader Clinic Queensland's aftercare offerings consisted primarily of the transitional housing program and the outpatient program. And then in 2019, we identified a significant gap in care for residents who were returning to both regional and rural communities. Their access there to ongoing supports and recovery resources was really limited. So this gap sort of highlighted for us the challenges that individuals faced transitioning from long-term residential treatment back into environments with fewer services, and it placed them at an increased risk of relapse during a really critical phase of their recovery. So in response, the concept of a digital aftercare platform was developed, namely Hader. And Hader is a digital app designed to provide a minimum of 4-week structured aftercare support, offering individual counselling within the app, self-paced psychoeducation and CBT-based content, relapse prevention tools, guided meditation audio clips, daily check-ins to sort of support their engagement within the app, and accountability and connection during early community reintegration. So following, sorry, I think I've missed a slide there. Yeah, cool. So following its implementation and use within the service, our director, Dr. Mel Simon, completed her PhD research project evaluating the effectiveness of the Hader app. And this research project focused on 2 primary questions. Firstly, does the Hader app reduce relapse rates? And secondly, does it improve engagement, mental wellbeing, and connection to supports? So there were 3 different studies that were conducted. The first was obviously the exploratory focus group interview, which involved 20 participants. 10 of those were Hader Clinic staff members. And the purpose of this was really just to kind of understand the needs, the challenges, and the preferences of individuals in recovery. It was about gathering insights from, so-called experts in the field, being clinicians, addiction counsellors, of what would constitute sort of effective relapse prevention strategies, and also to identify really what the key app features we wanted to include, what relapse triggers might there be, and relevant coping mechanisms for those who would be using it. The second pilot study involved 14 participants, and that was just simply to really test the feasibility, the usability, and the acceptability of the initial app prototype. So it was used really just to identify any technical or functional issues with the app, and also get some preliminary data on user engagement and satisfaction, and obviously to refine the app before conducting the main study. So the main study then involved a group of 160 participants who were divided into 2 groups. So 80 in Group A who received the app, and then 80 in Group B who was sort of our control group or treatment as usual group. So obviously we wanted to test the effectiveness of the relapse prevention app, focusing on the reducing of relapse rates, improving the management of cravings, mood, as well as quality of life, and providing also secondary data such as their engagement levels, the app design, the content quality, as well as both like the visual appeal and the interactivity of the app itself. So in terms of those demographics of the participants, both Group A and B had sort of comparable average age range. So Group A, the average age range was 40.8 years and Group B was 40.48. And the age distributions were broadly similar, a majority of participants falling into the 30 to 49 age range. The gender distributions, so both groups had a higher proportion of males than females. We typically find this in treatment as well. So Group A, 57 versus 23 females, and Group B, 54 versus 26. Primary drug of dependence, both actually had alcohol as the most common primary drug of dependence, but drugs and polysubstance misuse were present within both groups at comparable rates as well. And then we also looked at baseline psychological scores using the DAS-21 and K10. And on entry, the rates were sort of relatively similar, indicating comparable levels of depression, anxiety, stress, and psychological distress in both groups at the start of the study. Both groups did show substantial reductions in their DAS-21 and K10 scores after completion of the study. suggesting that the interventions were similarly effective in reducing psychological distress. The key difference, though, was that Group A had a higher number of participants with prescription medication dependence compared to Group B, and Group B had slightly more participants dependent on alcohol and polysubstance misuse. Group B had fewer participants in the age of 60 and above, whereas Group B had slightly more in the 50 to 59 age group. So in terms of the study design, as I said, there were 80 participants in each study group, and a mixed methods approach was utilised, capturing both quantitative and qualitative data at the 6-week mark post-commencement. The quantitative data captured included results of the psychometric tests, relapse rates, and actual use of the app itself. And qualitative data was recorded following user feedback, and they were provided via interviews over the phone. So primary results from this suggested that Group A, who were using the app as part of a relapse prevention tool, were able to maintain, abstinence, 81% of them, and Group B, 63% of participants maintained abstinence. And the key feature of engagement is that in terms of actually the features like counselling, for example, 77.5% found it most beneficial and 65% rated the telehealth as an effective model in order for that to be delivered. 62% really enjoyed the daily check-ins, which sort of involved selecting like emojis for their feelings. So they enjoyed having that there. And 41% used the meditation for emotion regulation or anxiety-related symptoms. And then 46.2% rated the CBT content within the app as relevant and coherent. So the usage insights showed that 75% logged in multiple times per week, but the average session time was under 5 minutes for each time they went on it. And 50% of them accessed it in the morning specifically. 52.5% rated the app as being easy to use, visually appealing, while 77.4% said that they would recommend it as a relapse prevention tool. So in terms of the hypothesis testing and outcomes, the primary hypothesis was supported as the app users did demonstrate lower relapse rates than Group B. And higher engagement was also linked to reduced cravings as well as improved quality of life. So, ultimately overall it was found that the app was effective in supporting relapse prevention, but there was findings that obviously supported further development and potential broader implementation of that. So we found, obviously, with the psychometric tests that the app group scored significantly lower on all of the mental health indicators, with the largest improvement being in anxiety levels. So the app group scoring 59% lower than those in the other group, and stress and depression scores were reduced by 43% and 53% respectively. And the K10 scores, being an indicator of psychological distress, were 28% lower in the app group. So all of these improvements were statistically significant, showing some promising evidence that the app was more effective than the control. And then in terms of secondary outcomes, obviously individuals reported that their wellbeing had been improved. It encouraged better connections to social support networks, and a lot of them were speaking to themes of empowerment, improving their daily routine, as well as having some form of accountability to their recovery whilst returning back to their home environment where those supports were limited. So some of the quotes directly from participants, was said things like, the module on guilt and shame really hit home. it felt like it was written for someone like me. And the other comments are sort of there as well that you can see. So really it was just about being recognised, having some accountability post-treatment, and also the engagement with counselling obviously was really heavily weighted there. Obviously, limitations of the study were recognised, so one being the quite small sample size. Statistically, it was adequate, but limited in terms of actual diversity. The study duration was 6 weeks, so it was able obviously to capture sort of short-term outcomes, but lacks insight into long-term relapse patterns. And obviously there's self-report bias there because obviously all of the data was self-reported in terms of their cravings, their mood, and any possible relapse events. And engagement variability was quite wide, so the difference in usage made results interpretation complex, indicating need for better engagement strategies of the app. So essentially, it did show obviously positive impact on relapse prevention and quality of life. It aligns with the literature and addresses gaps in digital aftercare solutions. And it could become a core aftercare component supporting some hybrid recovery models. But essentially, you know, the app did effectively reduce relapse rates in participants. It promoted some regular check-ins, and self-reflections were especially impactful. And the high uptake of the app during the first 2 weeks with reduction in use afterwards. So positive results supporting integrating the app into clinical aftercare programs or offering it sort of as a supplementary recovery tool was something that was certainly considered. Probably encouragingly, following this study a number of years ago, we have just this year completely redone the Hader Care app and improved on sort of the limitations that were identified, improving its usability, functionality, as well as just its capability in doing a broader range of things to support those in early recovery post-treatment. And that is it. Thank you.
We've probably got time for a question, if there's one in the crowd.
It was a lot of information at the end there, I know.
Thanks for that, Olivia. That was great. And thank you for sharing your own lived experience as well. That was really powerful. So thank you for your vulnerability. The recommendations for broader implementation, is there a barrier to that? Like, is that something that you guys are actually, Hader Clinic is considering making just a standard offering for clients that are wrapping up or exiting?
So we have integrated aftercare as part of residential treatment now. So anyone who does engage, whether it's in 8 weeks or 12 weeks, automatically receive 4 weeks of aftercare support. That is dependent on where they are. So if they happen to be local to Brisbane, then they can come in for 4 weeks of the outpatient program if they'd like to. But they have the option of getting our new Hader Care app. So it's, now rather than it being an add-on, we've actually incorporated it into the program structure because we realised how important it was.
I just want to echo the last comment. Sharing lived experience is such a powerful tool today to making us feel like we're not alone. So thank you for sharing that, Olivia. It was really amazing to learn about what the Hader Clinic's doing in addiction recovery. I think what's really, this presentation summed up for the few presentations we had this morning is that it's great that we go to uni and learn about what the evidence and the research suggests, but that alone doesn't always get the results, and the lived experience is such a powerful tool alongside that in supporting addiction recovery. So thank you, Olivia. Give Olivia a round of applause, and I think it's lunchtime.